In the Gita, Krishna tells about how the material world's a tangled mess, like a banyan tree, and that one has to cut down the tree, and then one has to search out that place where the Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. And one should become attached there, because we have to be attached. And there are many philosophies floating around the world in which the ultimate goal is supposedly nirvana, which means that one stops the flow of desire altogether. But according to Krishna, the Supreme Authority, it's not possible to stop the flow of desire. That the flow of desire has to be redirected. And the Brahma Samhita perfectly directs that flow of our desire to the lotus feet of Krishna. And also at the very end, we receive practical advice about how all the people of the world have to engage in some kind of work. And if they simply connect that work to the Supreme Personality of God, it begins to redirect that flow towards the Supreme, and then one can become happy. Without having a goal in mind, then we simply become diverted to all kinds of inferior goals. Without having the supreme goal in mind, our mind becomes diverted to all kinds of inferior goals, and we never become satisfied. So this Brahma Samhita is extremely important because it gives the details of all Vaishnava philosophy, and then points us very clearly towards the ultimate goal of life, which is devotion to the lotus feet of Krishna. I heard something fall. I thought phones are flying around. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudiraye. Today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7. Chapter 4, text number 2. An interesting title to this chapter. And that is, Hiranyakashipu terrorizes the universe. And history repeats itself. Sri Brahmo Vacha Tate me Durlabha Pumsam Yan Vrinishe Varan Mama Tatapi Vitaram Yanga Ranyadyap Yapi Durlabhan Sri Brahma Uvacha. Lord Brahma said, Tata, O dear son. Who's he speaking to? Huh? In the verse, he appears to be speaking to Hiranyakashipu. Tata, O dear son. Ime, all these. Durlabha, very rarely obtained. Pungsam, by men. Yan, those which. Vrinishe, you ask. Varan, benedictions. Mama, from me. Tatapi, still. Vitarami, I shall deliver. Anga, O Hiranyakashipu. Varan, the benedictions. Yadyapi, although. Durlabhan, not generally available. Translation, Lord Brahma said, O Hiranyakashipu, these benedictions for which you have asked are difficult to obtain for most men. Nonetheless, O my son, I shall grant you them, although they are generally not available. How come it's going off the screen? It's okay over here? Yes. It's okay here? All right, I'll suffer through it. Purport. Material benedictions are not always exactly worthy of being called benedictions. If one possesses more and more, a benediction itself may become a curse. For just as achieving material opulence in this material world requires great strength and endeavor, maintaining it also requires great endeavor. Lord Brahma informed Hiranyakashipu that although he was ready to offer him whatever he had asked, the result of the benediction would be difficult for Hiranyakashipu to maintain. Nonetheless, since Brahma had promised, he wanted to grant all the benedictions asked. The word durlabhan indicates that one should not take benedictions one cannot enjoy peacefully. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Nina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadahmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shivishakanvitamscha. Huh? Come on, what's going on? Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Go Premanande, Haribo. Welcome, everyone. Would you, microphones are here? Okay. Please introduce yourself.
Hare Krishna, good morning. It's so wonderful to be here with you all. My name is Leela Shukadasi, and this is my mother, Bethel.
I thought that was your mom. Nice to see you.
Hare Krishna. Bethel.
Bethel, how do you
like
spell?
Like Ethel with a B.
Bethel.
Bethel.
Nice. Do you live in the Bay Area?
No, I live in Northern California.
Which part?
Ferndale, which is near
Ferndale.
Eureka and Arcata.
Yeah, our friend Paramahamsa lives up there. Fantastic.
It's
Arcata. It doesn't get any better than that.
That's
nice. Great.
Thank you.
And you came down to see your daughter?
Absolutely.
Wow, thanks for coming. Have you ever been to our temple before?
No, not this temple.
We're
it's
so
the
happy
first.
you're here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Great to see you. And so nice to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come all the way out here to California to
it's my pleasure.
Enlighten us today. We also welcome all the exalted devotees who have joined us online this morning, who keep the vibration going wherever you are, at home, or in your car, or at work. And today's verse really struck me. I've been reading in the 7th canto, and previously in reading through this section of the Bhagavatam, in which this story is about, it's a famous story from the Bhagavatam. It's about one of the incarnations of Krishna who appears in the world, and his name's Nrsimhadev. So Nr means human, and Shringha means lion. He appears in a very angry form. When God gets mad, then people take notice. Even his wife Lakshmi didn't recognize him when he came in that form. And he was angry because this person, Hiranyakashipu, had abused his son. He was a child abuser. Psychologically and physically, he abused him. And so Krishna became very, very angry when he appeared in this form. So Hiranyakashipu is an interesting character. He's an iconic figure in the Shastra, in the scriptures. And he's somebody that perhaps, well, I can definitely relate to, Hiranyakashipu, because Hiranya means gold and Kashipu means soft bed. From the play, Hiranya means gold, Kashipu means soft bed. Grant me this boon, then I'll never drop dead. Never drop dead, that's what I said. The kids used to do a play about Nrsimhadev. I just happen to remember some of the lyrics. His propensity in life was to try to adjust the world to fit his needs, to find a comfortable position in this world, basically, and to try to enjoy as much as possible. And to one degree or another, that may be my mentality also, to see how I can be in this world and be comfortable against all odds. Because there are some pretty stiff odds against enjoying the material world. Now, Krishna says in the Gita that there's a way in which the material world he describes as dukhalayam ashashvatam. So first of all, alayam means a place. And unfortunately, duk means discontent, unhappiness. It comes from this, the meaning of being out of alignment. It's like if you have a wheel is a finely tuned instrument and has an axle. If the axle happens to be bent or just a little bit out of alignment with the wheel, then you get a lot of shaking and vibration and heat when you try to move the wheel along. Or the joints in your body. Anybody have any joints in their body? You won't notice until you get older that you have joints in your body, but you do. And the joints in your body, if they're a little bit out of alignment, then they drive you crazy. Your shoulder, your hip, and so forth. If it gets a little bit out of alignment. This is duk. Duk means being out of alignment. And in the material world, when I'm out of alignment with my real purpose, if I step out of that alignment with my real purpose, then I experience shaking, I experience heat, I experience what we call discontent. And so Hiranyakashipu, this idea that he tries to align himself in the material world, but he's only experiencing ultimately misery. So Krishna says the material world in general. And what is the material world? It really has to do with our consciousness. Because one can live in this world and not be in the material world if one has the proper consciousness, if one's consciousness is aligned properly. And this is the ultimate goal of yoga. It has to do, of course, there are, nowadays it's popular, yoga is popular in several of its aspects that don't have to do as much with consciousness. They have to do more with the physical exercise, which is also meant for alignment. It's meant to get your body in alignment so that you can sit down and then adjust your consciousness. The sixfold path of yoga, Ashtanga, you start with yam and niyam, which means, first of all, you align yourself with truth. Yam niyam means, first of all, you become ethical. First of all, you tell the truth wherever you go. You come clean. Stop lying. Stop lying to yourself, stop lying to others, and come clean. Because you can't align your consciousness properly if you're a liar. If you lie to other people, then you'll always be dogged by the fact that you're hiding something. And if you have ulterior motives, you'll always you'll always experience disquietude because you'll know that there's something lurking besides a sincerity in your heart. So aligning oneself physically, first of all, ethically, morally, yam niyam, and then regulating the senses, which Krishna also recommends in the Bhagavad Gita. He says that by following the regulative principles of freedom, what does that mean? It means that the senses, if left to their own devices, and Freud talked a lot about this. In fact, he was appalled, Freud was, about the degree at which human beings could become depraved when left to their own devices. They could simply be on a downward slide, and no one really knows where it could end. There was an experiment done at Stanford University in the 60s regarding prisoners and prison guards, and they set up a controlled situation in which some volunteers were prisoners and others were prison guards. And the experiment slid out of control. They had to cancel it because the prison guards became so abusive to the so-called prisoners that it was shocking. In fact, there's a major motion picture, I don't know if it's major, but there's a motion picture coming out to recreate that whole scenario. And if one doesn't rein in the senses and the mind, then the mind and senses can go to a default mode of depravity. There was some book written about soccer hooligans, not specifically soccer hooligans, but, well, you know, soccer is called football everywhere else in the world. And there's a phenomena which people go to these soccer matches and they get in a crowd mentality. Do you know about this? And then they make riots and everything like that. In fact, if you go to UK and you drive down the freeway, you'll find at rest stop areas there's big signs up that say no, that don't allow people to come there after soccer matches because they simply trash the place. But people get into these large gatherings and they begin to feed off one another's energy, and then they become unruly, and then they become violent, and then they start riots, they kill each other. And the author of the book, who studied this, observed how there's a way in which the individual becomes merged with the crowd, and they become intoxicated by that feeling of power, of being one with the crowd and being able to do anything they want and simply become unruly. If anyone's read the novels by Dostoevsky, he wrote one called Crime and Punishment, in which there's an examination of the way in which, in fact, the protagonist in the story wants to test to see what are the limits of morality, and simply just to see what will happen, he murders somebody with the idea that there's no actual moral codes in this world. The point is that without some kind of regulation, without some kind of ultimate goal for improvement, even a human being, so-called human being, can become altogether wholly depraved. And who knows where the bottom is. And to facilitate that, material nature also has various other bodies available to someone whose consciousness becomes completely depraved. When one leaves the body, then there's other kinds of accommodations that can be made. That's kind of weird. I mean, in any case, the recommendation is that one reform one's consciousness, one regulate the senses, so that one can elevate oneself to a higher mode of consciousness. Yam niyam, regulating the senses, becoming morally upright and ethical, so forth. And then there are systems of controlling the body itself through these yoga poses and so forth to become regulated. And then one can actually sit and contemplate, who am I really? Practically speaking, in the pace of today's world, people don't often get a chance to introspect. In fact, the Bhagavatam says that if one gets a moment of clarity in one's short lifespan of 100 years, one moment of clarity is worth all the rest of the years spent simply without a thought of what's the purpose of life. And it's a very valuable experience. So yoga means actually to cultivate that experience, to cultivate one's life so that one can introspect, so one can look within and see, who am I really? How to tune the consciousness perfectly towards the purpose of life, the purpose of the universe, and so forth. And the Vedas very clearly say there is a purpose. It's not that it's all a relative a mental construction because we've evolved from chemicals, and it just so happens that it's expedient that we cooperate with one another in this world due to blind evolution or something like that. There actually are objective principles like compassion and morality that are beyond the subjective ideas of this material world. And those come ultimately from the highest source, what we call Krishna. And therefore, when one's able to tune one's consciousness to Krishna, then one can actually experience happiness. Otherwise, one lives in dukkhalayam, the sphere of misery that is being out of alignment with the ultimate goal of life, dukkhalayam. There are different alayams in this world, like there's the Bhojana alaya in India where you go and you get your chapatis. You can get something to eat. You pay a couple rupees in a holy place, and the Bhojana alaya, they'll give you some sabji and some nice rotis. Rotis, have you had rotis before? They're like flat bread, unleavened bread. They roll it out, usually wheat, always wheat, and then you cook them on a stove, flatbread. You can get for just a few cents something to eat at the Bhojanalaya, because that's the place where you go to eat. But the material world's called the Dukhalaya. It's the place you come to suffer. Not very good. Better get it fixed. An old mantra I heard when I was in Vrindavan in 1975, and one of my godbrothers' voice was a little raspy, and sannyasi said, "What's wrong with your voice?" He said, "I don't know, it must have been that last kirtan, Maharaj." And he said, "Not very good, better get it fixed." So, not very good, better get it fixed. So, the Dukhalayam, one may say, well, I don't mind. In fact, there's a philosophy from, I think, the 16th century called Stoicism, in which one simply says, I will keep a stiff upper lip, and withstand the onslaught of material nature. However, Krishna then says, ashashvatam. Well, even if you're willing to undergo the misery, and some people are because they make a philosophy, well, without the bad, how can there be any good, and so forth. Therefore, I'll just simply suffer. It's just the way the material world is. But then he says, ashashvatam, which means that it's temporary. So even if you manage to tolerate, or even if you say, it's okay, I don't mind it, or even if you have a better than average life in the material world, then you're going to lose it. And that's another kind of suffering, because you may create for yourself the best of situations here in this temporary world, and then it'll be washed away suddenly. There's images I saw recently of some floods going on in the Middle East, and I saw some beautiful home with a big wall around it, and within a few minutes become demolished because of floods coming by. And at any time in this world, whatever I've built for myself, whatever fortress I have here, whatever way I've fortified myself through collecting a lot of money, or making a nice house, or surrounding myself with the best of friends and relatives, unfortunately, it will not withstand the force of time and tide. Time and tide wait for no man. How bleak is that on a Saturday morning? Okay, so Dukhalayam ashashvatam. The idea is that there is an onslaught, material nature. But Hiranyakashipu represents the best possible candidate in this election cycle that we're having now. In this primary election cycle, Hiranyakashipu is the one who, in this Srimad Bhagavatam pastime, who stands up to the whole material nature and says, no, we will be great here in this world. We will actually overcome these anomalies and become situated by force of our austerities, by the power of our wealth and so forth. We'll become happy here in the material world. And this is the idea of Hiranyakashipu, iconic figure who calculated how the material nature works, and by performing severe yogic austerities, never been seen before, the kind of austerities that he performed, such determination, but his ultimate purpose was altogether depraved, because his idea was to achieve domination. Shraddha, can you write to Nicole and tell her to look in my closet and in one of the books, Haribol Dayanini. Good to see you. Yes. Yeah, it's a little dense, so we can even now have some discussion.
Guru Maharaj, as you were discussing, as you were telling us that, anywhere in the material world, when people come together and they gather in groups, there's a tendency to go towards deprivation rather than... And I was thinking it took God to come here and make us do something good. We needed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to make us come together and feel the same addictive, intense high from his kirtan. And it doesn't take anything for us to come together and demolish everything around us. And I was thinking, as you were saying, why is that happening? Why is it so negative?
That's a really good point. May I have a Bhagavad Gita, please? So the reason is, scientifically, according to the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, that the world is actually composed of three modalities called Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And they compete for supremacy. There are qualities. First, Sattva, which means virtue. It means stability, maintenance, and clarity. There's Rajas, which means the impetus to improve oneself, the movement, even frenetic movement. And then there's Tamas, which is when bodies are at rest. And it also indicates darkness and inertia and ignorance. So these three modes of material nature, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, about how the modes are competing for supremacy. There's a way in which the modes, Krishna says, are always competing for supremacy. And you'll find that even in the so-called golden age of Satya Yuga, which is the universe, according to the Vedas, moves in cycles. It's not linear, but it's secular. And even in times when there's a predominance of goodness, there are upheavals, there are schisms, there are anomalies created by an upheaval of the lower modes of material nature. And in the Gita, Krishna says, regarding the modes and how they work, in 14:10, sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating the modes of passion and ignorance, O son of Bharat. Sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance, and at other times ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there is always competition for supremacy. Purport: when the mode of passion is prominent, the modes of goodness and ignorance are defeated. When the mode of goodness is prominent, passion and ignorance are defeated. And when the mode of ignorance is prominent, passion and goodness are defeated. This competition is always going on. Therefore, one who is actually intent on advancing in Krishna consciousness has to transcend these three modes. The prominence of some certain mode of nature is manifested in one's dealings, in his activities, in eating, etc. All this will be explained in later chapters. But if one wants, he can develop by practice the mode of goodness and thus defeat the modes of ignorance and passion. One can similarly develop the mode of passion and defeat goodness and ignorance. Or one can develop the mode of ignorance and defeat goodness and passion. Although there are these three modes of material nature, if one is determined, he can be blessed by the mode of goodness. And by transcending the mode of goodness, he can be situated in pure goodness, which is called the Vasudeva state, a state in which one can understand the science of God. By the manifestation of particular activities, it can be understood in what mode of nature one is situated. Interesting, isn't it? Alila,
Would you please say?
Can you use the microphone?
Would you please say what is in the mode of goodness, what is in the mode of passion, and what activities are in the mode of ignorance, so we can understand how our lives would be in one or the other?
Yeah, Krishna gives indications that we can relate to in the Bhagavad Gita, so we can get an understanding of how these modes are working. So one of the ways we can understand the mode of goodness and that we can all relate to it is that it's like, Krishna says, poison in the beginning but nectar in the end. Can anyone think of a time in their life or some activity they performed that was like poison in the beginning but nectar in the end? Is this relatable? I mentioned this to a couple of students from Stanford who were here last Sunday, and they said, exercise. Because in the beginning, I'm not going out there, I don't want to walk, I don't want to run, whatever, and then when you do it, then your circulatory system opens up and the good hormones start moving in your body, and then you feel like, oh, I feel good. Actually, I feel like doing something else good. And you start to get on a little bit of a roll. But in the beginning, it's very difficult. Where on the other hand, with passion, Krishna says, rajas, this middle mode, he said it's like nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. Can anybody relate to that? Most of you probably can't. Nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. Anything that you've ever experienced that was like that? Seemed really good when you started, but at the end, you're like, why did I do that? Huh? Overeating? That's the worst you can come up with? It's too bad this crowd. Like intoxication. Overworking, yeah. Intoxication is a good one because some people, they'll take intoxication. And of course, this drag you down in the mode of ignorance also, but intoxication, it seems like you're really happy and everything's good, and then, the next day, they call it a hangover. It's like, why did I do that? People get sick because they, never drink anything that you can ignite. And if they drink alcohol, and then the next they think, oh, as Prabhupada describes people drinking alcohol, he said, oh, now I have gone to the heaven. But then the person wakes up in a gutter somewhere. It's like, how did I get here? And who took all my stuff? And how come I feel sick? And so forth. It's like nectar in the beginning, but poison in the end. And then the mode of ignorance is suffering from beginning to end. But you still can't stop doing it. For some kinds of addiction, people are so overcome by the addiction, and it's such a hellish condition, but they still can't give it up. That's possible. These things happen. So Krishna describes, in ways we can understand, there's determination in the mode of ignorance. And that is, I don't have any determination. People who smoke, nowadays it's more common, but there's certain kinds of drugs people take where I've had friends who smoke marijuana, for instance, and then they're always talking about doing something, but they never actually do it. It's like they want somebody else to do it, but here's an idea. I have a great idea. Why don't you do something? Meh. It's sort of like the mode of determination in the mode of ignorance. You just can't get anywhere. And the determination in the mode of passion is governed by the result of one's work. That I'll do it, yeah, but if I need something, I need to get something in return. And determination in the mode of goodness is based on duty. I don't care if I get anything in return. It's my duty to do this. I have to do it. I'll do it no matter what happens. Even if a hurricane comes, I'm going to still do my duty. This is determination in the mode of goodness. So throughout the 14th chapter and the 18th chapter of the Gita, Krishna describes these various symptoms of the various modes and modalities here in the material world that control how things are going on. All right? Yeah. So one lesson, a few lessons I wanted to take away from today that are very helpful. They can actually help us in our determination, on the path of pure devotional service. And this first one has to do with taking on the burden. That actually, if I understand my existential position, and that is that material benediction is a misnomer. There is no material benediction. It's actually a burden to take on material things. So I may pray, as Janis Joplin sang, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a color TV?" And she was sort of mocking the materialistic society. Of course, she died of alcohol abuse and so forth, but which is it's a symptom of the 60s. There was this idealism, but then ultimately many people had to succumb to the lower modes of material nature anyway, because they didn't have a transcendental process. But, she, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all drive Porsches, I must make amends. She had this whole song sort of mocking the materialistic mindset that I have to have this, higher standard of living to show off and so forth. And it's a burden. And this is what's being pointed out here by the iconic figure of Hiranyakashipu, who did the most austerity you can do. I mean, people in this world, to get a good situation, have to do austerity. You have to work hard in order to get some material facility. And if you want excessive material facility, which isn't hardly necessary, studies have shown that after you earn $160,000 a year, the rest is so much extra, you can't enjoy much more than that in the material world. How much more material facility can you have that'll actually make more of an impact than that, than you actually need? So the lesson here is that even on a subtle level, and very subtly, if you try to get some material advantage, then ultimately that will become a burden for you. So we find, therefore, that those on the path of devotional service take on a different sort of approach to living their life in this world. One is described by a Narada Muni, who is definitely an advocate of pure devotional service, definitely. And he says some shocking things. One thing is, he says, Tyaktva sadharmam sharanam bhujam harer bhajana pakvota patetato yati yatakwa babajram abuddha musyakim kovarta apto vajatam sadharmataha. He said it's so much better to concentrate one's mind and attention on pure devotional service. The practices of pure devotional service really culminate in nine simple processes which begin with hearing about Krishna, and then chanting about Krishna, and then remembering Krishna, and serving Krishna, and so on. There's 9 different processes. And he advocates that human life should be centered around these activities of pure devotional service. And that if one, he says, tyaktva sadharmam, if you give up your material occupation to take up these activities of pure devotional service, then you'll never lose. He said, even if you blow it, even if you try for devotional service, you jump for that higher ring and you miss it, at least you jumped. Even in the impetus, even in the attempt to jump for that ring, he said, even if you fall back down again because you didn't consider, you were immature in your decision. He said, better that you tried for it than you had a completely so-called successful material life. Because it's, again, a misnomer, a successful material life. There is no success here in the material world. The best one could say is, we had a good run. I heard this from one of my relatives after my father died, and then my mother was there, and we had a good run. I was thinking, run at what? I mean, it's everyone has the same run. We end up in the same place, which is being recycled. So better to make a run. A good run means you take a shot at trying for pure devotional service. And Narada Muni is so encouraging. He says, even if you completely blow it, at least you tried. You're much better than the person who never tried, and they tried instead to adjust their situation in the material world, and they succeeded. And they made a lot of money, and they became well situated in the material world. So what? It doesn't make any difference. There's no consequence, ultimately, because that simply gets recycled and you start over again. It's true. It's actually true. That's what happens. If you hang around long enough, you see. Everything just goes through that cycle. So then he says, Tasyaiva heto prayateta kovido. He goes on to say that one shouldn't try so hard for material comforts and to adjust one's life materially, he said, because you're going to get what you naturally get anyway. By the grace of material nature, there's a justice built into the process of life in the material world, and that is that you get what you deserve, which may be a little scary, but the fact is you're not going to get more or less than you deserve. More happiness, or you're not going to get more distress than you deserve either. There's a certain allotment. Yes?
Does deserve mean that one is such a nice person that they deserve to get more, or does deserve mean karmic? Or what
it means karmic, yeah, because there's a way in which, in the continuum of my life, after going through many lifetimes, I appear in this life, and if I take it as the all in all, I may be disconcerted, because I might think, well, how did I deserve this? But according to the Gita, and because of my activities in previous lives, for instance, just as a simple example, if I give a lot of charity in a previous life, in this life, the money will come back to me naturally. If I happen to steal from other people in my last life, and somebody steals from me in this life, there's a justice to it that, okay, you took, therefore it's being taken from you. So why do bad things happen to good people is explained in the idea of the continuum. So the idea here is that if one gives oneself to the process of pure devotional service and tries to adjust one's consciousness towards service to the Supreme, and without any expectation of return, then in that frequency one can actually really experience happiness. And even the slightest idea of trying to take on some material adjustment or happiness in this world becomes troublesome, because I can't accommodate it. I'm a spiritual being, and it's very difficult for me to take on material. I'm incompatible with material existence. And therefore, Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita that you stay calm, don't try to don't become overly concerned with the circumstances that you're in this lifetime. You should live a balanced life, a healthy life, but don't try to adjust it too dramatically, because it's not adjustable. It's not altogether adjustable, and even if you do find a little wiggle room to adjust it, it's of little consequence anyway, because you'll have to move on from that situation. Rather, the suggestion is that you concentrate your attention on the ultimate goal of life, which is service, the highest service, which is this consciousness, which is focused on service to the Supreme. Then you can actually experience real happiness. So this is the first lesson from Hiranyakashipu in his life. The word Durlabhan indicates that one should not take benedictions one cannot enjoy peacefully. And my theory, my presentation today is that material benedictions cannot be enjoyed peacefully. Because the moment you get them is the moment you start feeling anxiety. In fact, even before you get them, the moment you desire them is when you start getting anxiety. You just have to start thinking about, I want this, I want that. And there's another way to think. There's another way to focus one's energy, and that is service, selfless service. Those who do selfless service are celebrated everywhere in the world, and they are also welcome wherever they go in the world. Those who are trying to adjust their material situation are in competition with everybody else in the material world. And that's a tough situation. Okay. material benedictions, are they really benedictions? So in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1:18-13 is a famous verse, and it tells the incomparable, the highest kind of benediction one can get and where it comes from. So it's rather surprising what it is, but here it is, 1:18-13. I'll say, please repeat. 1:18-13. 1:18-13. Tulayama lavenapi naswargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashishaha. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter, and what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. Purport: when there are some similar points, it is possible to compare one thing to another. One cannot compare the association of a pure devotee to anything material. Men who are addicted to material happiness aspire to reach the heavenly planets like the moon, Venus, and Indraloka, and those who are advanced in material philosophical speculations aspire after liberation from all material bondage. When one becomes frustrated with all kinds of material advancement, one desires the opposite type of liberation, which is called apunarbhava, or no rebirth. But the pure devotees of the Lord do not aspire after the happiness obtained in the heavenly planets, nor do they aspire after liberation from material bondage. In other words, for the pure devotees of the Lord, the material pleasures obtainable in the heavenly planets are like phantasmagoria, and because they are already liberated from all material conceptions of pleasure and distress, they are factually liberated even in the material world. This means that the pure devotees of the Lord are engaged in a transcendental existence, namely the loving service of the Lord, both in the material world and the spiritual world. As a government servant is always the same, either in the office or at home or at any place, so a devotee has nothing to do with anything material, for he is exclusively engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. Since he has nothing to do with anything material, what pleasure can he derive from material benedictions like kingship or other overlordships, which are finished quickly with the end of the body? Devotional service is eternal. It has no end because it is spiritual. Therefore, since the assets of a pure devotee are completely different from material assets, there is no comparison between the two. Sutta Goswami was a pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his association with the rishis in Naimisaranya is unique. In the material world, association with gross materialists is veritably condemned. The materialist is called Yoshit Sangi, or one who is too much attached to material enjoyment, women, and other paraphernalia. Such attachment is conditioned because it drives away the benedictions of life and prosperity. And just the opposite is Bhagavat Sangi, or one who is always in the association with the Lord's name, form, qualities, etc. Such association is always desirable. It is worshipable, it is praiseworthy, and one may accept it as the highest goal of life. So, just in such a simple way, association with those who have this pure and very clear aim in life, which is the devotional service of Krishna, pure service, service for service, is the most desirable, and by association with such persons, one can get the best benediction in life, which is to also attain that goal in life. You had a point?
So, here Prabhuji, we read that even a moment of association of pure devotees is worth. So, but what I'm trying to understand is, if we serve pure devotees, like how Narada, he got their remnants, and then it was for a long time. But what is the science behind saying that a moment? Because in a moment, nothing can happen, means at least in the material world. So what is the science behind saying that even a moment of association with the pure devotee is better than all the other benedictions?
There's a cumulative effect. Whenever we come in contact with Krishna, or as pure devotees especially, because Krishna is especially in the heart of his pure devotees, or even better than that, love for Krishna is there within the heart of the devotees, which is the internal energy of Krishna, which is actually the ultimate goal. And when one comes in contact with Krishna or the devotees, then even if it's for a moment, that is recorded and counted. And sometimes we see that within a moment, somebody becomes apparently enlightened. This can be explained through the accumulation of agyata sukriti, that is, these kinds of encounters in which one extends some goodwill towards Krishna or the devotees without fully knowing who Krishna is or who the devotees are. But still it's counted and recorded. There's a story, for instance, about a devotee, and actually he built a temple in Vrindavan that you can visit. It's in Gopinath Bazaar. And it's mentioned in the Jiva Goswami's Bhagavat Sandarbha, or Bhakti Sandarbha. He says that one day this person who was a great materialist and who was conducting business on a very high level, walking home, heard a sweeper say, now is the time, because she was sweeping and she needed him to move, and said, now's the time to move. And when he heard that, he somehow interpreted it as, now's the time to surrender to Krishna. And that was because he had accumulated these bhakti credits in his heart. When one lecture, Prabhupada describes how every living being has a bank account in their heart. And when they get these deposits of association with pure devotees and with Krishna, that there's accumulation. And the Brihat Naradita Purana says, which is quoted in the beginning of the Jaiva Dharma, when one gets enough accumulation of these kinds of bhakti credits, then what appears is Shraddha. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kahi Suridhanashchoy Krishna Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Suddenly one has this feeling like, oh, devotees are good. Devotional service is good. That happens to people sometimes. They just suddenly have an inclination towards the devotees, like, I like you guys. I don't know why. I don't know who you are, but I think this is nice. It's like, where'd you get that from? From previous contact. So suddenly it appears that it appears suddenly, but there's an accumulation and a fructification of these kinds of things that take place. Bahunam jamana mante jnanavam mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha. After many, many births and deaths, one may become a jnani, and then when they come to the next stage of that, oh, I see the ultimate goal of life is Vasudeva, Krishna. And so there's an evolution, and it may appear within 1 second, and that may be the result of previous contacts with pure devotees. But it never goes in vain, that kind of thing. Yes, Manjula Kanta.
In the context of association, I just wanted to add what I thought was relevant, is that a lot of times we feel that it's only Niji Seva, that's contact, actual contact, to see the devotee, to be there, maybe wipe his feet, give him this. I did service. But sometimes the most beautiful example of doing service and never being able to actually serve, literally actual serve, are Prabhupada's disciples. So many of them got so little of him. They would get a glance, they would get a moment, but they've served him all their life with Shravanam. They have listened to him sitting somewhere in some corner, far, far away. Their Diksha beads come to them. They didn't even get to stand there and take it from him. But in their hearts, they have cultivated such deep faith, and they have actually done this service by listening to him. And in this age of technology, Kali has so many faults, but this beautiful chance to keep hearing. Gaur Govinda Maharaj is right next to me. All I have to do is click, and I have his association. And by doing that, we see, like I'm commenting that this is great, but they're the living proof that it is possible to have that, not just a moment, but decades of association with pure devotees just by listening to their words. And I don't know, I feel that that's just as good as being able to do actual physical service to them. They're both equally good.
Yeah, well, the service is there also. Give me Adi Lila, volume 1, first chapter, 34th verse, in which Srila Prabhupada speaks about the Vani and the Vapu. There's a way in which one, as you say, may not have very much contact with one's spiritual master, or there may be a way in which the spiritual master leaves. Then Prabhupada says that the order of the spiritual master becomes the life and soul of the disciple. And that service continues throughout one's life. And even if it seems like some insignificant kind of service, if one sticks to that throughout one's life, we see practically, and you brought up Prabhupada disciples, this actually extends to everybody, but we can see that those devotees who have stuck with their service throughout their life, whether it was given directly or indirectly, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has an open order. Mahaprabhu gave an open order. He told everyone, become a guru, spread Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. And Prabhupada mentioned, when he was asked about how will the movement go on after you left, he said, someone who understands Mahaprabhu's order or the order of the spiritual master, which are the same, and follows it. Understand means to follow it. That person naturally becomes connected and self-effulgent. And here Prabhupada writes in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, one should always remember that a person who is reluctant to accept a spiritual master and be initiated is sure to be baffled in his endeavor to go back home, back to Godhead. One who is not properly initiated may present himself as a great devotee, but in fact he is sure to encounter many stumbling blocks on his path of progress towards spiritual realization, with the result that he must continue his term of material existence without relief. Such a helpless person is compared to a ship without a rudder, for such a ship can never reach its destination. It is imperative, therefore, that one accept a spiritual master if he at all desires to gain the favor of the Lord. The service of the spiritual master is essential. If there's no chance to serve the spiritual master directly, a devotee should serve him by remembering his instructions. There's no difference between the spiritual master's instructions and the spiritual master himself. In his absence, therefore, his words of direction should be the pride of the disciple. It goes on from there, but that's the main point. This is Adi Lila 135. Thanks to Mukaravinda, who knows Prabhupada's books well. I have a couple more lessons from these pages of the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 7.4, 9 through 12. Prabhupada writes in the purport in 7.4, 9 through 12, it appears that even the highest planetary systems to which people are promoted by pious activities, disturbances are created by asuras like Hiranyakashipu. No one in the three worlds can live in peace and prosperity without disturbance. So, the upheaval in the material world is dramatic and very interesting, and we can watch it practically if you study history or if you just live long enough, which is another way of studying history. But there's a story Prabhupada recounts here in the Srimad Bhagavatam about a devotee named Subhuti Roy. And he had a servant who he treated like a son. And the servant was from a Muslim family. Subhuti Roy was from a Hindu family. And this young person served him throughout his life. And then later on, by the way that material nature works, and Prabhupada says, by some trick, this servant later on became a king, a great ruler. And then Subhuti Roy was a subordinate, according to the way the society was at the time. And the wife of this king found out that he used to serve under Subhuti Roy, and she also found out that he had sometimes chastised him, for his insubordination in different ways. It was a loving chastisement, but nonetheless, the wife of the king said, "You should kill him." And he said, "I can't kill him. He's like my father. He's a father figure. He practically raised me. He protected me my whole life." And he said, "Well, at least take away his caste," because at that time people were so crazy with this caste consciousness that if simply a person from the Muslim community would sprinkle water from their water pot onto a so-called Hindu, then the Hindu would lose his caste. So Subhuti Roy, so the king agreed to that because his wife was relentless apparently. It's like kept insisting on this thing, so he said, "Okay." So he went, "Okay, here, you're a Muslim now." And Subhuti didn't know what to do. Of course, he went and took advice from a lot of people. Said, "Oh, you have to drink, boiling ghee and dye and this and that in order to reform yourself." There's all kinds of weird advice that he got. Finally, he met Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and said, "Go to Vrindavan, chant Hare Krishna, everything's going to be fine." But the point of the story, the point that I want to bring out, and that comes out in the story of Hiranyakashipu, is you never know who's going to be up and who's going to be down. You may think, "Oh, I am up now," but the way the modes shift, suddenly you go like, "How'd that guy get in charge?" He was this, wasn't he the, it's like, yeah, that's the same guy. It's like, you mean he's the, yep, he's the, everyone's going, "What happened?" How that happened? It's by the force of the modes of nature. Don't be surprised if some lowlife ends up on top all of a sudden. It'll happen. It'll happen. Don't say anything. And that's what happened in this pastime. Hiranyakashipu was an upstart. But he manipulated the material world in a certain way, and he took advantage of the loopholes that are here, and just the timing. It was just timing. That's the way the material world works. And all of a sudden, he was on top of everybody, and in a very sinister way, he was administering punishment and controlling everybody in the universe. So that is what happens here in the material world. So Prabhupada writes 7.4.14 that the asuras sometimes become so powerful that they can engage even Narada Muni and similar devotees in their service. This does not mean that Narada was subordinate to Hiranyakashipu. Sometimes, however, it so happens in this material world that great personalities, even great devotees, can also be controlled by the asuras. And he writes earlier in 7.3.12, the point is that this Nawab had been an ordinary menial servant of Subhuti Roy, but was somehow or other able to occupy the supreme post of Nawab of Bengal. This is the material world. When I was in Delhi, I had a long layover, about 7-hour layover before I could fly out. And so I stayed, they have these like interim hotel, you can go in a room for a little while. So I was checking in there, and the person who was helping me with my bags and getting me checked in was a really friendly fellow from Delhi. And he asked me my name, and I told him, and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Nawab." And I said, "Nawab means king." And he goes, "Yeah, but I'm not a king." And just the way he said it really charmed me, kind of. It's like he sort of laughed, and he goes, "Yeah, but I'm not a king." And this is the understanding of humble people. Yes, I'm not a king. Even if they take a position of leadership, they're thinking I'm a servant leader. But the material world is a rough and tumble place, because the material world, as I described before, is a state of consciousness in which people are competing for oxygen, and they want to take up to get as much real estate as possible and as much control over others as possible. And even as we're living in this material world, trying to pursue a pure kind of consciousness, service consciousness, we may be subjected to various upheavals in the material world. However, we simply go on and tolerate. We tolerate and go on with our endeavor for ultimate perfection in service. Prabhupada also notes, and this goes with the theme, actually this is a verse from 7.4.19, in spite of achieving the power to control in all directions, and in spite of enjoying all types of dear sense gratification as much as possible, Hiranyakashipu was dissatisfied because instead of controlling his senses, he remained their servant. And later on, after Hiranyakashipu was killed by Nrsingadev, which was appreciated by all the people in the universe, Prahlad Maharaj, in his prayers to Nrsingadev, says something that we can take to heart. And this is from the Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.23. My dear Lord, people in general want to be elevated to the higher planetary systems for a long duration of life, opulence and enjoyment, but I've seen all these through the activities of my father. When my father was angry and he laughed sarcastically at the demigods, they were immediately vanquished simply by seeing the movements of his eyebrows. Yet my father, who is so powerful, has now been vanquished by you within a moment. And he goes on to say in another prayer, it's like, why would I want anything in the material world? I've seen the pinnacle of material enjoyment attained by my father, and it came to naught. And so why should I try for it? So making this case to oneself through the scripture and through just looking at ordinary, we hear of these iconic figures in scripture, but we can also see for ourselves. And Krishna recommends this when he speaks to Uddhava in his conversation, that you should observe for yourself how the material world works and come to this conclusion that it's not a stable place, and that I should therefore dedicate myself to a higher cause, to a higher kind of cultivation of consciousness, of pure service. And this is the making that decision internally, that this is what I'm going to do, changes everything. Because once one has decided that through a mature discrimination, this is what we call well-reasoned faith. You look at both sides and you say, what's the best that could come from adjusting my situation here in the material world? And then you can also see that some people who work very hard in the material world don't get ahead anyway. And other people who don't work very hard at all get ahead naturally. And one can then also hear from the Shastra that the ultimate goal of life is spiritual. It's to come to the point of a pure desire to serve. And one might try for that. One might actually try for that. And once one makes the decision to try for that against all odds, then one begins to move forward in spiritual life. So it's good to make this case. If you have a court case and you come to a very conclusive decision and you say, yes, this is the ultimate goal, and then you can make that decision for yourself, then the way in which you see the world and you interact with the world changes dramatically around you because of your decision. So it's a good idea to decide that. And there may be one or two other lessons before we open up the floor for discussion. Yeah, I'll just make two more points. One is from 7:4:25 through 26. And in the translation to the verse, this is what happened. The demigods became so perturbed by the presence of Hiranyakashipu that they went and prayed to Krishna for relief. And here's what he said. The voice of the Lord vibrated as follows. O best of learned persons, do not fear. I wish all good fortune to you. Become my devotees by hearing and chanting about me and offering me prayers. For these are certainly meant to award benedictions to all living entities. I know all about the activities of Hiranyakashipu and shall surely stop them very soon. Please wait patiently until that time. That means go on, no matter what the disturbance here in this material world, and there will be many, go on with your service, don't stop. Keep the vibration going. And finally, from 7:4:37, the power, the influence of devotional service. Krishna and his names are not different. In fact, the indication of Rupa Goswami is that Krishna is actually more present in his name, more powerful in his name than he is personally, because the name is more merciful than Krishna. So in 7:4:37, Prabhupada writes in the purport, it is sometimes said that when one is influenced by evil stars like Saturn, Rahu, or Ketu, he cannot make advancement in any prospective activity. In just the opposite way, Prahlad Maharaj was influenced by Krishna, the supreme planet, and thus he could not think of the material world and live without Krishna consciousness. So sometimes when we're talking about asking people to take the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a science in the Vedas called Vastu. And Vastu theory starts with the idea that every object in this world has a particular influence. Every object has an influence. And we may not even notice it, but it influences our life. As I've mentioned several times, I had a professional organizer over once, and she told me the theory of simplification, and that is if you have too many things in your living space that are not necessary, they amount to visual noise. Ever experienced that? Yeah, when you remove them, then you realize, oh, it's quiet in here now. And so every object in the world has some influence over us. And the spiritual objects, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, they also have a very powerful influence. In fact, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the Bhagavatam itself is non-different from Krishna's planet, Goloka Vrindavan, which is non-different from Krishna himself. So imagine, of course, people sometimes become concerned with the different influences of heavenly bodies in their lives. It's a science of the modes of material nature and how they're working and how those modes are administered by the different planets that we're in proximity to, according to our birth chart and so forth. And imagine then what will happen if the planet of Goloka Vrindavan moves into your home, we tell people. So if you move the Srimad Bhagavatam in your home, it's not an insignificant thing. It's actually, you move the Bhagavatam in your home, and then there's the influence of that Goloka Vrindavan planet in your life. And if you move the objects of pure devotional service, the pure devotees, if you have a pure devotee into your house will be different. In fact, even before he or she gets there, you'll change everything. Because you're like, we can't have that here, because, right? You'll move everything out. Everything starts to change, and your life transforms when you move in the objects, the tadiya, those things that are most dearly connected to Krishna into your life, like Srimad Bhagavatam, the devotees of the Lord, and things like that. And then if you start regularly chanting the names of Krishna every day, and you move that into your life, and you do have to move it in because 24 hours are already taken up. Yes or yes? Yes. I mean, I got to sleep, right? And then there's this time I got to do this, I got to do that. Everyone's expecting him to do something. If you add it all up, it's like, how much time do you have? I don't have any time. Because 24 hours are used up. It's like, okay, then you connect with the spiritual master who says, okay, but you have to move this into your life. For an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, you have to move this into your life. What are you going to move in? This mantra you have to have for 45 minutes. Like, people ask you, how are you going to do that for 2 hours a day? You know, it's like, I just decided I'm moving it into my life. And this is the beginning of spiritual life. You move it in. It's like, sorry, we're moving this in. And then by the influence of the spiritual planet, the spiritual influence in your life, then things start to change. Your life begins to transform. And this science is something that's practical. Everyone can take this up, and to whatever degree one can afford to move Krishna into one's life, to that degree that one's life will begin to change. And becomes Krishna's absolute. Even if you move him in a little bit, your life will begin to change in dramatic ways. So Prahlad Maharaj is indicating, and Srila Prabhupada comments, about how despite the fact that he was in this very stressful situation, being born in the family of a child abuser, he went on with his chanting and hearing about Krishna, and remained aloof, from the situation. That's not to say that one shouldn't take every precaution and take necessary steps when one's in a particular, a situation like that. But at the same time, one must go on with one's spiritual practice. And now we'll take a few reflections.
Thank you, Maharaj. The second lesson that you are telling, go on with your service. I was remembering one of the section in your book, in Realizations, you write about the Aghasuri story. And Aghasuri story, how the devotees, they're the friend, if you like to explain.
Which story?
The Aghasuri story, in which the friends
Aghasura?
the friends of Krishna, when they saw and then they decided, and similarly how the devotee go on Sankirtan, they think the same way. If you like to explain, all right.
That the cowherd boys, they walked into the mouth of Aghasura.
Yeah.
He was a big snake.
Yeah.
And they were arguing about whether he was a real snake or not. And then they said, well, whatever he is, because Krishna's there, he'll protect us. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and then
so they walked into the mouth of the snake.
Well, you told Sankirtan devotee, they go in a group and they have the back by Krishna, that whenever they go out, they don't have fear.
Yeah, so then I mentioned in the context of Sankirtan, like when I was in New York, I went to the Harinam ashram, and I was with Abhiram Prabhu, who was in charge of that ashram, and we went up on the roof and we were looking out over New York City. And actually it looks like Aghasura, because the buildings, they kind of go like in this pattern that looks like a big python. And he said, there it is, that's the Aghasura. And every day the devotees go out, they take their books and their instruments and they go into the belly of Aghasura and they chant. Because it's kind of dangerous. When you come back from the Dham, you think, what am I doing here anyway? Sometimes I come back to Burlingame and think, what am I doing in the suburbs of California? I should be in the Dham. And then I realized it's like, as Prabhupada said to my godbrother Pragosh, he said, when Pragosh asked, should I stay in the West or should I stay in the Dham? And Prabhupada said, the West is either for preaching or for sense gratification. So the devotees take shelter of Krishna and they enter right into the belly of the materialistic civilization. But because they maintain association and they continue to think of Krishna's beautiful smiling face, then they're protected.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Well, that's great. Okay, we have from the internet.
Maharaj, this is from Keval Bhakti and Taravali from Toronto.
Kevala Bhakti and Taravali. Great.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class. You spoke of steadiness in our service. Sometimes we find that devotees sufficiently fortify themselves from external or non-Krishna conscious influences that threaten to shake them from their very service. However, when they are hurt by other devotees, they seem to be unable to overcome this obstacle and continue in their service. How do we overcome these kinds of challenges in our service?
If I understood the question properly, and you can make sure I did, Shraddha, that there's a way in which one may fortify oneself from the material world and the influences that might disturb one's service, but then there might be discord amongst devotees and even hurtful situations amongst devotees. And then how does one deal with those kinds of things? Is that the basic idea? What a nice question, very practical, right? There is every kind of combination and permutation of disturbance will occur to one on the spiritual path. So one should, if one manages one's expectation, this is one thing that really helps, is managing one's expectations. Because if I expect a certain kind of situation and I get another, sometimes I become disturbed by it. So disturbance can come from any direction, and I think one of the things that's so disturbing about internal discord amongst devotees is oftentimes devotees think that it can't happen. Prabhupada, in dealing with this kind of discord, pointed out, for instance, in a letter to Atreya Rishi Prabhu, who said, why are the leaders arguing amongst themselves? He thought this was a spiritual movement, there should be no arguments. And Prabhupada said, he claimed that his idea was an impersonalist idea, that there should be no conflict or friction. He said, actually, because we're all individuals, there'll even in the spiritual world, even in spiritual realm, there'll be differences of opinion, because we're eternally individuals, and we have, even as far as conducting spiritual life, we have different ideas about how it can be done. So one level of protection is to manage your expectation, because when these things come from internal, it may seem even more severe because you think, oh, it's coming from a devotee, therefore, it's hard for you to accommodate or adjust to that. So get used to it. That's one thing. Well, not get used to it, but expect that it can come from that position. And the other general principle is to work through it through communication, because in any kind of discordant situation, generally more disclosure and more communication is better than less. I often find that a discord comes from a lack of understanding what's really happening. Oftentimes, people communicate in ways they get piecemeal information, and then they jump to conclusions, and they come to an opinion, and then when they actually come together and talk about it, what actually happened, and what was your intention, and why did you do this, and so forth, then through the light of full disclosure, one can heal these kinds of situations. So this is part of maturity, as one learns how to work through these kinds of situations. And finally, I would say that it's important to find your niche in Krishna consciousness. Because as the world around you, even in the universe of your Krishna conscious association, goes into temporary upheaval in one way or the other, if you have a very clear sangha of devotees that you depend on, who are extremely fixed in Krishna consciousness, mentors that you can take shelter of, then you'll be able to work through these various times of upheaval. And I may not have hit exactly on your points, Kevala Bhakti and Taravali, but those are a few general ideas, and Kanka has more to add to that.
So, as Prabhupada's disciples, we've been through so many upheavals, and I think that one of the things like that I always remember is Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada said, beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. And so, whether we're in the association of devotees or whether we're out working or wherever we are, we have to remember that we're in the material world. So material nature is very powerful, and we have to just take shelter. I think the strong foundation that I found personally for myself in these cases is to always read Prabhupada's books, and that when the wind blows, then you have a strong foundation and your house won't blow over. It's also really important to prayer. Prayer is really important, and like Prabhu said, take shelter of your older God brothers and God sisters and anyone who can give you assistance in these matters. But it's so important to cling to the chanting and cling to the reading, because that will help you to go over the turbulence, whatever it may be, or the disagreements, or whatever it may be, and to be kind and loving and compassionate.
Thank you. Words of wisdom from a stalwart. And just considering also that time, there's some of these old sayings have endured because they have truth in them. Yikes. And that is that time heals all wounds. If one can maintain one's equilibrium somehow or other, like in the verse Tate Anukampam Susimikshimano, Sridhar Swami comments and says, one way or another you should stay alive in Krishna consciousness. Find out how to stay alive. And if you can continue over time, then things change. Things change. And what seems so severe right now, you'll have a different perspective on later on. Kanka?
The other one was don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So many times my family would say, how could you stay in that movement? How could you be associated? And I'd say, hey, this is the baby and the bathwater. There's two different things. You throw out the dirty water, but you don't give up the baby.
What an image, too. I mean, God, throw the baby out with the bath. What'd you do? Yeah, nice advice. Other points? Yeah.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I really like the point you mentioned about Srimad Bhagavatam, that you bring Srimad Bhagavatam in the house and you bring us like Golok Vrindavan into your house. So I think that will help us tremendously while we are distributing sets. Very helpful.
Yeah, definitely, to remember that. I don't know if I told the story in my book. I think I did relate. I gave a lecture in several places where I'd include this about how it's not just a book, but it's actually a deity, and you're moving into your house, and it makes a big difference. I gave that talk in Washington, D.C. once, and we were selling sets of Bhagavatams. By the way, I think that day we sold 45 sets of Bhagavatams. But after the class, this young man came up to me, and he told me that I grew up in Krishna consciousness, and I wanted to tell you something that relates to your lecture. And he said, I was born into the movement, and he said, when I became a teenager, I turned away. I just gave it up. And he said, I didn't just give it up, but I went as far in the opposite direction as I could. And he also became very much involved in drugs, heavy drugs. And then he said that he had an overdose, and he left his body. And then he had this out-of-body experience when he had temporarily left his body. This happens, right, Kanka? Confirmed, yes. So, she's a nurse. So, then he told me what happened. He said when he was growing up as a child, there was a set of Bhagavatams just outside his room where he lived. And the first canto was fully visible, the cover, when he'd come in and out of his room as a kid. It was always there. And then he said, in this near-death experience, he had this vision of the cover of the first canto of the Bhagavatam. That's what came to him predominantly. And that's what brought him back from that brink. And in that moment, he realized, he saw the Bhagavatam cover, and then he realized, oh, I'm a devotee, I have a purpose in life. And he came back into his body. And when he came back from that overdose situation, he gave up drugs. And the reason I met him, because I was on a tour that year going to all the Rath Yatras, and he was on the tour also, because he was working with the Festival of India, traveling in the truck and looking to see how he could advance in devotional service. And he had turned his life around because of that experience. And he said, so what you said about putting the Bhagavatam in your house, it's really true. He said, it actually happened to me. It changed. It made a difference having that book there. I'm just saying. All right, what else? Other points from the purports of the class? Yeah. Yes. Possession is 9/10 of the law.
Guruji, thank you so much for the wonderful lecture, and I'm convinced that material benediction cannot be enjoyed peacefully. But there is one thing that struck me, that what you said about Narada Muni, that even if he cannot do it, we should take a best shot at pure devotional service. Even though you're not successful, at least we have tried. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, you jump for it and you miss the ring. It's like, hey, he tried. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, Sri Kumar and then Shamalangi.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. I like your point where you said that you get whatever you deserve. You don't really need to push for more or less, because especially in today's like corporate circles, it seems like when the other person goes ahead, envy comes in, and also the competition comes in, and really it troubles and it takes up all your time. But once we understand this point which you gave, that yeah, they might really deserve it, and also what I am getting is what according to I. But of course, I just do my 8 hours of work properly, and then don't really need to worry about it. And kind of helps a lot.
There's a few points that are in that same vein. One is that Krishna's overseeing everything. One interesting point it's kind of related is in the Ayurveda there's a verse that one is supposed to say before one takes medicine. And, you can go to all this trouble to make all the best medicines. You can get the most refined ingredients and have the best doctor put them together, but still the Ayurveda says before you take it you have to say, what is it? Yeah, Vishnu. There's a mantra with Vishnu, and it says that, only Vishnu can make this work. And Prahlad Maharaj says the same thing, Balasya neha sharanam pitara on the shingha, that parents can't protect a child, that the boat on water can't protect a drowning man, medicine can't protect the patient. But the point is, not that one should simply give up trying. It's not that parents shouldn't try to do the best they can to help their children. Obviously they should. And not that if a man's drowning on the water, you don't take out the boat because you say, well, if he's going to be saved, he'll be saved anyway, and so forth. And it's not that you don't take up you don't go and try to get the best medical help you possibly can if you're sick. It's your duty. You have to, because this body is a loner, and you have to take care of it. You can't wreck it. And however, you have to go in with the mantra, Vishnu. If Vishnu wants this to happen, it will. I'm dependent on that. And similarly, in the realm of work, as we're working in the world, it's not that we don't do our best. But we should have this internal cultivation that whatever the result is, depends upon how Krishna wants to arrange things, or according to what I deserve, I'm going to get it. So I shouldn't become overly heated in that. Thank you, nice point. Shamalangi?
Yeah, actually tomorrow is our Bhakti Vaibhav exam. So yesterday evening I was just trying to read through some of the chapters. So 118 was one of them, and this 13th verse which you just read today about a moment of association of a pure devotee is much better than, higher than all material benedictions. So I kind of liked it, and I read it aloud, and my Prabhuji also heard. So, and then I was telling, I can't go tomorrow to temple, I have to prepare. So he quoted the same thing back to me. So then I said, okay, I'll come. So that's how maybe I would have come, but that was a decision point. And one more thing I wanted to say is like the same thing, you cannot get more than what you deserve. I recently went to...
Or less, which is also interesting.
Yeah. So I recently went to a store to get some birthday gifts for some other kids' birthdays, and then I had 2 coupons with me, and one was a better deal than the other, and I wanted to use the other one which has a better deal. And when I went to the store, I got some items, and few of them were not, they were not in that category. So the coupon was not valid for those items. So I changed, and I got back something else. And then again, the lady at the counter, she said, oh, but the amount is not correct. It happened twice or thrice, and I just wanted to get that one and not the other one. But then I gave up. I said, okay, I can't go anymore. And then I got the regular, discount, whatever I had to get. So that just came to my mind when you were saying this.
Yeah, the practical.
Maharaj, this lecture is very relevant to me when I work with my children, especially with teenagers, when we work with the 11 to 16-year-olds. And it's difficult for them because they go into school, they see stuff. It's an age of exploration. They want to go out there, and then, they were what we were. I want the car, I want the keys, I want the petrol, and I want the credit card. But what are you going to do? I don't know. I just want it. When we talk to children, it's very difficult because a lot of times they notice that we're too spiritual for them. We're just blocking their road. How do we communicate? Do we give them time to experiment and then point out when things aren't working that, look, this is not, are we just going to walk with them and then pull them up every time they fall and work with them? Or what is your perspective on that? How do we work with children when they go through this?
Well, children or anybody else, you have to see that each living entity has their own destiny, and they have their own particular impetus in life, and it's kind of a mystery. And in one of the purports that I was reading in the 7th canto, Prabhupada said a Vaishnav has to be like the super soul. I mean, imagine Krishna. We're all Krishna's children, and everyone's gone haywire here in the material world. It's just going every direction. And, what does he do? He sort of tolerates and provides facility because he gives free will. Of course, the devotees understand that what's good for people, and they try to give them, they try to intervene in certain ways to help. But just as far as psychology goes, what I've found out, at least distributing books over so many years and meeting people, is that really you can't force anybody. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can lead a man to wisdom, but you can't make him think. And there's a way in which, with children, I've seen that the best thing you can do is try to create an ideal environment, and then also set an example. And then you also have to pray to Vishnu, just like when you're taking medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, because look at the Srimad Bhagavatam, what it's telling us. Maharaj Anga was a pure devotee, and his son was called Vena. Vena was the worst kid who was ever born, ever. And he came from a pure devotee family. So, what does that tell you? And why did why does the Shastra talk so much about kings and what happens to them? Because people are all looking at kings and saying, well, they have everything. We'd like to have that too. And then they say, yeah, but look at what happens to the kings. Same reversals, same things happen. So you also have to have a modicum of detachment when you're doing your worldly duty. You do the best you can to take care of the living entities and your children. But at the same time, you have to be aware of the fact that there are forces beyond one's control in this material world, and a little bit of detachment. Imho. Yes. Okay. Tie goes to the runner.
On that note, yesterday I had a meeting with one of the person who reported to me earlier at Apple, and I didn't had any idea that I will meet with him. So day before yesterday, he just sent me a LinkedIn stuff, and then I accepted, and we met yesterday. And for 1 year when he was there, so he was in India, his kid had some special needs, so he moved from India to US, and I just, because he was qualified, I helped him being here for a year, and then he moved on and I moved on in life. And yesterday when he was talking, and I was thinking, he is right now a pretty good position in a very good company, and I was thinking, wow, you know, despite he moved away from Apple, and he would have thought that things are not very good, but when I look into his overall stuff on where he is, probably he achieved more than many of the other people achieve. And I was thinking, first of all, material things are not the only way, but since he was destined around it, Krishna somehow or the other pulled him from one place, and it may appear that it was a distraction at that point of time. But now after 2 years, 3 years, when we look at it, you know, Krishna has plans for everyone in whatever capacity they can help, either spiritual, material. There are lessons in each event.
Yeah. So this is what we're doing, also observing through the scripture and through regular life, the topsy-turvy nature of this world, because the modes are churning. And the best place to hold on is in dedication to pure devotional service. That's the best place to stake one's claim, because that's the part where you'll actually be able to get real assets that will last. And all the other kinds of endeavors will churn, and what appears to be stable today will be lost tomorrow. It's just actually stunning. I mean, Vaisesika Prabhu was telling me a story about a devotee who invented some kind of software, and it was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he sold it, and he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And then he made some other kind of investment, and Vaisesika said, you know, why don't you just be satisfied with what you have? And he said, no, we can double it. And then he lost everything before he left his body. And there have been other, even amidst devotees, I know there was somebody else who I've just recently heard about, who lived overseas, who was a similar kind of reversal. And these things happen all the time in the material world. The material situation is not stable. Therefore, Bhagavatam says, Kamasya nendriya pritir labo jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jignasya narto yascheha karmabi. Your material life should be maintained to the degree that it assists you in your pursuit of pure devotional service. To that degree, you should maintain it and try to increase it. Don't try to get overheated on that side. Don't even let your mind go there. Just do the best you can with what you have. In fact, in one place in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada writes about career. Because oftentimes people ask about Varna Ashram, what's my Varna Ashram, how do I... Prabhupada says, the devotees invent some way to make a livelihood. He used the word invent. It's just, you have to be inventive. It's like, what should I do? Should I'm a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra? But it's like, invent something and go on with your process. Whatever you have to do it and move on. And don't become so preoccupied that you forget to chant your rounds. That's a disaster. I mean, that's something that you'll regret later on when you come to full consciousness. You go, how could I have wasted that day? In fact, this I want to remind everybody, it's leap year. I've been thinking a lot about this. I have a chart on my wall, and I realized there's an extra day this year. Did you know that? There's normally 365 days in a year. Did you know that you have 366 days this year? That's been bugging me all year. It's like, what am I going to do with that extra day? How am I going to take full advantage of it? And we should be thinking like that for our whole life. I have an opportunity here I've never had before. How am I going to take advantage of it? And if you take advantage, remember Hiranyakashipu, he took full advantage of every way in which you can get ahead in the material world, and it came to naught. Whereas Prabhupada contrasts that with Prahlad Maharaj, who is just simply devoted, and the rewards were unlimited from simple devotion. You don't even have to be a great devotee. You just have to be sincere. And if you just stay in your little corner of the universe, wherever it is, wherever you're destined to, you were put by the force of nature, but you're just a little sincere, Krishna will unlimitedly reciprocate, because that's what he does. And the only thing that interests him at all is bhakti. There's nothing else that he's interested in at all. It's just that the scent of pure devotion. And if one doesn't have pure devotion, if one has the desire to become pure, Krishna notices that too, because it's got the same scent. Yes, Bali Mardan Prabhu. He was just ready to go. Yes. Go ahead. Possession is 9/10 of the law.
Thank you. Thank you, Maharaj, for the wonderful class. I like the point, Maharaj, where in the Bhagavatam section it says, even pure devotees like Narad Muni, sometimes they have to work under the influence of demons like Hiranyakashipu. So the tendency is when we try to become devotees, we think now I should deserve the best, I should get everything best. I'm chanting Krishna's name. In fact, rather opposite happens, because Krishna is trying to correct those attitudes. I'm just trying to see happening to myself. So just relating to that, I've observed since I have trying to become a devotee, I've got the worst bosses in my career, in every project that I've worked. And as you rightly said, Maharaj, when you look ahead, when the time passes, you actually realize Krishna did that for good, why those bosses came in your life. It was to correct that attitude, some correction was required. And because of that, Krishna put you into that situation.
That's a nice way, that this juxtaposition of your material life and your spiritual life, and considering it carefully, is mentioned in the Sri Upanishad. Vidyam cha yas tadvedo bayam saha avidya yamratum tirtva vidya yamratum ashnute. Only one who can learn the process of nascence and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. So we live in a bi-dimensional universe. We're spirit, but we're ensconced in matter. And in dealing with that through philosophy and spiritual practice, we actually become mature and eligible to come to full realization. So good for you. Keep up the good work.
Yes. So actually, I was trying to say my realization, but somehow I went inside for offering. Regarding the moment of association with the devotees, which Prabhupada made in the beginning of your classes, you mentioned about that it cannot be compared with anyone else. So same thing which got an example by Mahavishnu Maharaj was talking, that he was realizing the fact, he examining. So Narad Muni visited Ambrish Maharaj one time, and Ambrish Maharaj said his brother is not a devotee, so why not you? And Narad Muni said, Sadhu Sangha Sarva Shastra Kahe, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha Sarva Siddhi Hai. Then Amrish Maharaj listened and said, yes, why not you try to influence my brother, he's a demon. And Narad Muni went, knocked the door. When he knocked the door, he said, Narad, by just hearing this word, Narad, he was so envious, he opened with his gada, mace in his hand, to kill Narad. He said, no, just by moment association you will get, or moment association with devotees. Then he picked up the gada and ran away with Narad Muni. And then Narad Muni fled away, just like he surrendered to Lord Vishnu. And then finally he got hold of Lord Vishnu and he is also chasing. Then he was questioning, you said that by Lavamatra Sadhu Sangha, anybody, you get Sarva Siddhi. How I am? Then Narad Muni said, because of the moment association, you are now not in material world, you are in Vaikuntha.
Yeah. Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Piti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhavai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrishim Tanama Purete Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. While we were in Mayapur, we were in the section of the Bhagavatam in which we hear so much, even Narada Muni saying, I think the demons have it better than the devotees, because they're more intense in thinking of Krishna. They hate him so much that they're thinking of him 24 hours a day, and they got so much benefit then. Interesting in that section, though, it's mentioned all the demons got benefit except for Vena, because Vena said there is no Vishnu. And he just completely, so the Mayavadis and those who won't think of Krishna out of envy, they're in a bad situation. It reminded me of a letter Prabhupada wrote, because somebody was a follower of Siddhaswarupananda Prabhu, who there was sort of slightly like a little bit of sectarian feeling this devotee had, and said, only by following Siddhaswarupananda will you actually go back to Godhead. And Prabhupada wrote back and he said, why just Siddhaswarupananda? Why not all the devotees in our movement will go back to God? He said, and he started naming. He said, Brahmananda will go back to Godhead. This one will go back to Godhead. He said, everyone will go back, except Mr. Nair. He'll have to stay in the material world. He was the one who tried to oppose the Bombay project so much. Okay, last point? Yes.
I was just thinking, Prabhu, how this whole class felt like a continuation of what we discussed on Wednesday, that do not stop the activities of pure consciousness and become unchaste. So, as you said, we were talking about the material world and material benedictions and the modes, but we can overcome all this very easily, as you said in the last class, by keeping our consciousness pure all the time. And then with that clarity, it's possible to overcome the modes.
It is a continuation. Practically, it's all a continuation of that same point. And it's actually a harrowing experience, because what's at stake is so huge, and the opportunity is so great, and that Krishna is so accommodating, that if I can catch this spirit, even for a moment, what to speak of turning my life in that direction, then the Shastra says such a person becomes celebrated all over the three worlds, that if one can turn in that direction. And ultimately, it's an internal decision that one says that I'm going to pursue this. No matter what happens, I'm going to take the path of pure devotional service. So Prabhupada, in his purports and in his lectures, oftentimes he'll repeat the same thing over and over again. And I recall a letter that he wrote to Jayananda. When Jayananda had written to him, we don't know what he wrote, but some problem was going on, and he wrote to Prabhupada, what's the solution? Prabhupada said, it's the same old answer. You go on chanting Hare Krishna and pray to Krishna. Vancha kalpatarvasya kripasnabheva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah.